In this video, we're going to be working with text. So the first thing I want to do is I want to fit this image to the screen. So if I go up to the top, View, Fit on Screen, it's just going to give me that full picture view. The next thing that we want to talk about is the text tool. So over on the sidebar here, if you put your cursor over top, you'll see that it's a horizontal type text tool. If I hold it down, I get a flyout menu. So I have horizontal, vertical, horizontal type mask tool, and vertical type mask tool. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a text box. So I can scroll and create a text box here, and you can type in whatever you want. So right now I have white text being typed, and you can see that the font that I have chosen is Tecton Pro. It's a bold condensed font, 72 points. It's left justified, and it is white. If I want to make any of the changes, I can highlight over top of it. I can click over on the color swatch, make it black, hit OK. I can change the font size. And 72 is the default, so I have to type in. And now that I've increased it. One thing to note is each font has its own tracking, kerning, baseline height. So these things you might actually have to change manually. Another thing to note is that this is a text box, so it's not going to go anything beyond the text box. If there's too much text, so I'm just going to copy this. Right now it just stops at the end, but if I wanted to increase the text box, if I just grab and move it up, click on my text box again. If I put my cursor over top in this middle, I can drag it down and you'll see that the text is actually still there. And that's how to make a text box. We're going to get into something a little bit more now, so I'm just going to delete this text box. You can drag it over to the garbage, or you can right click and delete layer, or you can just, as long as it's selected, go over to your trash can and delete it. So there's a few different ways to do everything in Photoshop, so you'll just get to know what is the most comfortable way for you. Now what I want to do is I just want to create some text. I'm going to move it to the center. Now this is just a rough estimate for the center. If I want to actually center align it, I can click on my text layer. I hit Shift and I have them both selected, or you can hit Control because it's really only two, or Command, and that way they're both selected. Then I can go up to the top here. Here are my align, but you have to be on the Move tool to be able to get your align options. So I have the Move tool selected. I'm going to go over here and align vertical centers, and then I'm going to align horizontal centers. And you can do this even if it's not a background image. If you wanted to align it to another image, you would just have to make sure that they're both selected. And there you go. Okay, next what I want to do is go back to my text tool, and we're going to talk about our character box. If you like to drag your box off, you can. I know a lot of people find it a little bit easier when you're working with character boxes, but if you don't, you can just drag it back and bring it back. Here it says I'm using the Tecton Pro. If I just click over, you'll notice I do have an insane amount of fonts loaded in my laptop. And I'm just going to go down and pick a different font. So this one is a very, very thin font. So when you're working with thin fonts, there's a lot of things that you have to think about. Is it legible? Can people see it? If this was a billboard poster, would they see it from a distance? One thing you can do in your character box is you can put a faux bold. So if they do not offer a bold, which this one does, but if they do not, because some fonts do not, you can put what's called a faux bold. And you click on here, and it's kind of like that in between. It's a computer generated bold. If you want to make it italicized, you can do that. If you want to make it all upper caps, you can. If you want to have just it as a small caps, you can do that. Superscript, subscript, underline, and strike through. And that's the basics of this row. And now you did learn a little bit about kerning, tracking, baseline heights, and we're gonna work on that right now. So I'm gonna change the size just so it's easier to see. Now I'm gonna have to move it over. Oh. And now I'm gonna have to move it over. So I just wanna make sure that the one layer is selected. And I changed it to 400 points. Right now it is at 72 points if I were to make another line. So and now you'll see that both the lines are 72 points apart, but they're 400 points in size. So that doesn't really make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to change this to 400. So now it's going to take the natural size of the 400 height and it's putting that space in between here. I'm going to make this one, this row, a little smaller. I'm going to manually type in 250. Actually, I'm going to make it a little smaller. 150. I'm going to center justify everything. If I go over to my paragraph, center justify. And what that did is it didn't have it all selected, so it only center justified the bottom line. So I will select it all and center justify. In these cases, sometimes you just have to move things over again. And now, because I have a much smaller font at the bottom here, I can change up the spacing, and let's try, 72 is a little small, let's try 140. You could also do this using two different layers of text. I just like to keep everything a little clean, especially if you're working with projects where you have hundreds of layers. So it's just kind of good to get into habit of this. So here we have Dream Big, Visit Winnipeg. Now what I want to talk to you about are baseline. If I wanted, let's say, the dream to move, I can hit 50 points and it's going to go up 50 points. I can hit a minus and it'll drop down 50 points. So maybe I want to try to get the top of the D with the R. I'm going to have to go down a little bit lower. And maybe I want to have the top of the G with the top of the I there. I mean, I'm not really a fan of that per se. I think it looks a little bit awkward, but I think that you can get the idea. And now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the tracking and kerning. It's very important to make sure that your fonts don't look crammed and that they all look evenly spaced. This font itself is not really that bad with its tracking and kerning. So if you're looking at the spaces between each letter, in this case I do want them to be relatively equal. I would say that it is pretty close to the standard I, but let's just bring this back. Now let's bring this one back. And I'm going to highlight one letter and I'm going to change it to -100. So what it does is it grabs the right side of it and it makes that space smaller. So if I wanted to grab the B, I'm going to put the space in between these two and -100. So that made it a lot smaller. You could also select the whole word. And make it smaller that way. But especially when you're working with the fonts, so right here, by making it smaller, I noticed the E and the A has a lot less room than between the A and the M. So I'm just going to highlight the E. And I add a little bit more space. Let's see what it looks like with a little bit more. So maybe I have to manually do this. And I can just put this one. And now, if you wanted to play with your height variables, if you want to stretch out fonts, let's say I want to stretch out this font. I want the D to be large, so I'm going to make it 300, 200, and then I'll put that drop baseline again. I think that font's a little too big. Let's try 150. And then let's try the same thing with here. So I'm stretching out the length of the font. And again, I'm not a fan of it, but I'm just trying to show you the technique. If you want to stretch it out in width, there's 200, for example, 150, 110, and I think you get the hint on that. So let's change the color up. I'm going to make it white, and I could change it through here, or being on the text tool I can go up to the top and change it that way. And now I want to center align it again. So I'm just going to make sure that both are selected. I go to my move tool, center align vertically, center align horizontally.